trust We have a story to tell to the nation. And when we think, it's one of my favorite Christmas songs because we really have a story to tell. And that story doesn't change from one year to the next. It's the same, it has been the same, and it's probably one of the greatest stories you can tell. You know, when you think of Easter, of course, when he is risen, but he wouldn't have been born, he couldn't have been raised, been raised from the dead. But thank God that he was born. Thank God that he gave his life for our sin. And thank God that he is alive and he resurrected and he's interceding for us today. So let's stand together as we sing number 167.
We've a story
to tell.
That shall turn their hearts to light, a story of truth and mercy, a story of peace and light, a story of peace and light. For the darkness shall turn to
Thank God for that wonderful story.
Angels bring with them, sweet was
We welcome everyone to the service this morning. It's good to see everyone out on this beautiful morning, even though we'd probably rather see some sunshine, which we haven't seen for a little while. But nevertheless, when we get up every morning, it's a new day. And it's a day that God has made. And we are blessed again to be able to gather together for this service this morning. So we welcome you to the service this morning, and let's continue to be in prayer one for another, that the Lord might just be able to meet with us in a very special way. It's by way of announcement. Remember the journey to Bethlehem, and also, as was announced, would be 2 weeks from this morning, would be the Christmas program and the combined service. So there will be only one service that Sunday morning, and that starts at 9:15 and ends when it's finished, which will be not any later than when we have worship service. I'm sure of that. So keep that in mind. That's how close we are to Christmas. That's hard to believe. But my, oh my, we just celebrated Thanksgiving, and now we're talking about Christmas, and then after Christmas, then we have one Sunday, and then we're into a new year. Time keeps moving on, and as time moves on, we do too. Some of us get a little slower, but that goes along in life. But God is good. If each and every one of us would look back over our lifetime, whether we're young or whether we're a little bit older, why, God was faithful. He hasn't failed us. He has blessed us wonderfully, and we thank the Lord for that. This morning, we're going to go into the book of Acts. We haven't been in the book of Acts now for a few weeks because we had communion, and the Sunday before that I spoke out of Ephesians, and then we had the fifth Sunday, which was last Sunday of the month, and now we're in the first Sunday of this month. So this morning we're going to go into the book of Acts again to our faith theme. And when we think of the faith that was the people, the apostles, and the leaders, and all the people there in the early church had them, they had tremendous faith, and they got a lot accomplished. And I thank God that we're still serving the same God today as they served, and God is still the same yesterday, today, and forever. A lot of things have changed, and some for not some maybe not for the good, but some maybe for the good. But you know, if we are in fellowship with him, he promised that he would never leave us. He promised that he would never forsake us. And he promised that he would be with us each and every day. You know, when the sun comes up in the morning, it reminds me again, you know, of his faithfulness. Because he said that morning by morning, new mercies I see. And you know, when the sun comes up, that's the way he planned it, and no one changed it. And when it comes up, it always goes down. You know, always on time. Not the same time. You know, then that's something else that's hard to figure out. You know, that it changes. The sunrise changes a little bit every day. The sunset changes a little bit every day. And then we have our 4 seasons. And that's permanent. That don't change. But, you know, everything is on schedule. You know, it made me, I thought a lot about last Sunday's lesson, you know, there, you know, that when it was out of Isaiah there about creation, you know. God made it that way, and no one changed it. And no one can change it. I believe maybe some people tried already, but they failed. All right, so much for that. That wasn't in the sermon. We're going to chapter 9 of Acts, and we're going to continue on where we had left off the last time, and we left off there at verse 31, where Saul escapes to Jerusalem. They let him down in a basket, and he escaped. And the scripture says that Barnabas, he escapes to go to Jerusalem. He don't escape from Jerusalem. He escapes from Damascus to go to Jerusalem. And as he goes to Jerusalem, when he got to Jerusalem, they didn't want to accept him. You know, he was more or less an outcast. Now, if you would have been in Jerusalem when Saul came back, which group would you have been in?
I would have been a little nervous.
The group that accepted him or the group that rejected him? But you know, God always has a plan. And God always has a man somewhere to undertake. And there was Barnabas. And Barnabas took him, and after that, he was accepted. Okay, so that brings us down then to the end of that. It says there in verse 31, then had the churches rest throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria, and were edified and walking in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Ghost were multiplied. Now, when I read that again, you know, it doesn't say they were added. It says they were multiplied. Now, I like multiplication. I don't like subtraction sometimes, but multiplication. Anyhow, that brings us down to 32. And it says, and it came to pass as Peter passed throughout all the quarters, he came down also to the saints which dwelt at Lydia. Now, here we come to Peter. Now, Peter hasn't been on the scene too much here lately, but now here for the next portion here, our chapter or so, Peter comes on the scene again. And you know, when we started out with Peter, because Peter preached that great sermon there on the day of Pentecost, and there were those that were added to the church, and then after they were added, then they started multiplying. But we find here that it says that they had peace. They had rest. So that means there was peace in the churches. Now, we find here that at about this time, Saul traveled to Damascus, and then, of course, from there he went to Jerusalem. Philip, after he baptized the eunuch, he headed toward Caesarea. And as he's headed toward Caesarea, Peter, he more or less keeps going throughout Judea, Samaria, and now he comes down there to the saints there at Lydia. Now, also it says that when Peter kept on going, and as he kept on going, of course, he kept on preaching. And as he kept on preaching, of course, he kept on doing that which the Lord had for him to do, because the Lord said that I'm going to make you fishers of men. And he was out there fishing. He was out there reaching those that needed to be reached. And he was out there touching those that needed to be touched. And he was out there meeting those that had a special need. You know, he met up with all kinds of people, but we didn't read too much about Peter for a little while now. But now he comes on there to the saints, and that caught my eye also. You know, saints, you know, all of us here today that know Christ as our Savior, we're saints. Did you ever think of yourself as a saint? I didn't until I started reading a little bit more and thinking a little bit more about a saint. I still don't consider myself a saint. I don't think I'll really be a saint until I make it into the pearly gates. And then I'll be a saint. But if you're a believer, you're considered a saint. It says, and as he came down there he found a certain man named AEneas, which had kept his bed 8 years and was sick of the palsy. Now think of that. Here Peter comes down there to the saints that dwelt there at Lydia, and there he meets this person that was bedfast. Now I don't know. I know of some people that were bedfast when they got up into their older years. My wife's mother, she came to the place that after she had her stroke, for some time she was able to get around. Then there was a time that she was bedfast. She couldn't get out of bed herself, and she couldn't get in bed herself. They had to get her out of bed every so often to change the bedding. This went on for a number of years. But then one day God said that's enough, and then He took her home to be with Him in glory. But here's a man now that was bedfast for 8 years. He was sick of the palsy. He couldn't help himself. And I don't know how people took care of him or that. It doesn't say that, but it says that he kept his bed 8 years. Now that's a long time. You know, when we get sick and we have to stay in bed for a couple of days, it seems rather long. It seems rather long. But 8 years, that's quite a time. And here comes Peter. Peter comes down there now, and Peter sees this man. I don't know if he met him before or not, but he called him by name. I don't know if he was introduced to him, or how it all came to pass as he was there. And maybe as he was there, maybe he saw him laying there, and maybe some people mentioned to him a little bit about, because Peter had a reputation. By this time, he had a reputation before. But after his conversion, I think his reputation changed a little bit. He became a different person. Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Feed my lambs." And he also said, "I'm going to make you fishers of men." And when I think earlier we had about Peter, where they would lay their sick out in the streets, that if Peter would pass by, maybe just maybe his shadow would overshadow them that were laying out in the street along the road, and they'd be healed. That's the kind of reputation Peter had. And that didn't stay at one place. That spread around. So anyhow, Peter said unto him, Ananias, Jesus Christ maketh thee whole. Arise. And make thy bed. Now, think of the faith that Peter had here. What would it have been like if Peter would have said, Jesus Christ maketh thee whole, and nothing would have happened? But that wasn't the case. And Peter wasn't afraid of that either. Because he says, Jesus Christ maketh thee whole, arise, make thy bed, and he arose immediately. Now, in one translation, it says, we're about making thy bed. He says, get up, take care of your bed, and he arose immediately. So when Peter said, arise, he arose, he took up his bed. Can you imagine how weak he was? Because he didn't get much exercise. He didn't walk. He probably hadn't walked much in the last 8 years. But he arose immediately, and all that dwell in Lydia and in Saron saw him and turned to the Lord. See what effect this had. Here on the whole community. Here it mentions two different names of places. When they saw this man laying for a number of years. Now they saw this man get up. You know, maybe they weren't there when he got up, but they probably saw him carrying his bed. Instead of laying in his bed, he carried his bed and he traveled. He went. He didn't stay there anymore. It says, and all that dwell in Lydia and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Tremendous faith and power. You know, what does it say there in Ephesians chapter 8? Above all, chapter 6 I think it is. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the devil. And the thought is, the power that comes by enduring faith. We might say we have faith, but how strong is our faith? And the more we exercise our faith, the stronger our faith becomes. But now this brings us down to Dorcas in verse 36. Now Peter moves on, and it says, now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds, which she did. And Ananias is raised. Peter don't hang around there. He moves on. There's other people he needs to meet. But he moves on, and it says, now it speaks about this Tabitha, which was at Joppa, and as she was there, of course, her name means Dorcas. And it says, this woman was full of good works. Doesn't that remind you of somebody? It should. It should remind you of your wife, shouldn't it? Here was a woman that was a useful woman. A woman that I believe fill a lot of needs in the area in where she lived. But it says, and it came to pass in those days that she was sick, and she died. Who when they had washed, laid her in an upper chamber. Now here was this lady that had a tremendous gift. She did a lot of things. She had a good reputation. Here was a woman that proudly fitted the term saints. Because she was needed, she was liked, she was used, she was useful. You could just keep on going. But she got sick. And when she got sick, it said she died. Now, they washed her. That was a different way of doing things than they do today, of course. They just washed her, and they laid her in the upper chamber, in the upper bed, is what I would say. Now, why did they do that? They weren't finished with her yet. They weren't ready to bury her yet, because they had some other things in mind. It says, and for as much as Lydia was nigh to Joppa, which wasn't too far, Peter didn't go very far from Lydia to Joppa until he met this situation here. And it says, and the disciples that heard that Peter was there, they sent 2 men desiring him that he would not delay to come to them. Now, why do you think they sent for Peter? She already died. They washed her. They cleaned her up. And they laid her in the upper chamber. And now they sent 2 men to go and get Peter. They heard Peter was nearby. Now, up until this time, do you remember reading anywhere that Peter raised anybody from the dead? I'm asking you. I don't know. I don't think so, but I might be wrong. I don't remember reading anywhere that Peter raised anybody from the dead. But why did they send for Peter? They heard what was happening. You know, it said that when Peter was passing by, that those that were sick, they laid out in the streets. It doesn't say that those that were dead, they laid out in the streets. But those that were sick, they laid out in the streets. Perhaps his shadow would heal them. But I don't think it reads that those that were dead, they laid out. Perhaps passing by, they might get alive. But these people here had enough of faith in knowing that if it sent for Peter, do you think they thought he'd raise her from the dead? They must have, or they wouldn't have sent for him. If I die, they'll probably call the undertaker. They might call on Jesus before I die, but after I'm dead, they probably won't expect Jesus to raise me from the dead. But here this lady died, and they called for Peter. What was he going to do? Well, they weren't finished yet with this lady. Now, listen to this. Then Peter arose and went with them, and when he was when he was come, they brought him into the upper chamber, and all the widows which stood by weeping, and showing the coats and garments which Dorcas made while she was yet alive. I don't know if this is biblical or not, but when I read that, they called Peter to come to a fashion show. Now, in January, I usually watch what goes on at the farm show. I don't go to the farm show because it's better to watch it on TV. You don't always get to see what you want to see, but sometimes they have a fashion show. And they'll have these people showing off the different garments that people make. Well, now they called for Peter. And at this time, I don't know what they told Peter, but they brought Peter up in the upper chamber, and there were these widows, and they were showing him the coats, the garments, which Dorcas made while she was yet alive. Here was a lady that died and had a great gift. A gift of sewing. A gift I don't have. And a gift maybe some of you don't have. But then there's some of you that do. And here was this lady that could take some material and could sew it together and make coats and garments. And I'm assuming that when there was a need, that someone needed a coat or someone needed a garment, Dorcas had it. And Dorcas passed it on. And Dorcas was really liked because she didn't have the gift of speaking, perhaps. And she probably didn't have the gift of teaching. But she had a great gift that God gave her. And that was a gift of sewing, and the gift of giving, and the gift of hospitality, and the gift of being a good person. And now she died. And here were these widows, and it says that they showed them all that she did. But Peter put them all forth. Now, he saw what she did. I'm sure he hurt quite a bit. But he puts all of these people out of the room. At one place, I'm not sure where it was, and I'm not sure who it was. But Jesus that maybe had to put some people out of the room because of their unbelief, because they maybe left him to scorn. I don't think this was the case here, because they called for him. When they called for Jesus to come to heal to Lazarus, they said, if you would have been here, he wouldn't have died. They didn't say that to Peter, but Peter puts them all out of the room. And as he puts them all out of the room, he kneeled down and he prayed. Faith? And is there faith? And is there power in prayer? And he turned him to the body. Now, I don't know what he prayed for. I don't know what he said. The Bible don't say that. But he prayed. And something happened. He prayed. And he turned him to the body and said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes. She opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, what did she do? She sat up. What made her sit up? Well, we know it's the power of God. But it says when she saw Peter, she sat up. Before that, she opened her eyes. Of course, she couldn't have saw him if she wouldn't have opened her eyes. But she was dead. Her eyes were closed. Peter prayed. And Peter turns to the body. In other words, he wasn't facing her when he prayed. I'm thinking he was looking heavenwards. And after he prayed, he had enough of faith that he looked at, he said, he turned to Tabitha and he said, Tabitha, arise. She opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. And then he says, and he gave her his hand and lifted her up. And when he called the saints and widows, presented her alive. Power, faith in prayer. And it was known throughout all Joppa. And many people believed in the Lord. And it came to pass that he tarried many days in Joppa with one Simon, a tanner. Isn't it something? Boy, when I read and when I study and when I think of some of the great things that these men did in the early church, and how that God blessed them, and how that God used them, and how that God just multiplied them, added, multiplied. Nowhere do you read that they subtracted, but they kept on multiplying and adding and subtracting, not subtracting, adding and multiplying, and just kept on growing. And thank God because of that we're here today. And thank God because of what Jesus Christ did when he came as a babe, and when he did what he did, and when he gave his life, he ascended into heaven, and thank God that he's interceding for us today. And one day, this same Jesus that was taken up is coming again. And are you ready? Let's stand together for the closing prayer and the benediction.